And the simple answer is we protect this like any other Azure thing. Like unless you think you can hack, our Azure backend, you get the same level of protection in how we're protecting the data here.
Welcome to another episode of Blue Square Security. Today we talk to Joey, who is an SSP for Security Copilot, and this is one of those offerings from Microsoft that has a lot of media attention because of the AI component to it, but it also addresses a lot of scenarios where security teams are struggling, whether that's time to respond or the lack of resources to respond. It's such an amazing offering, and it was such a great conversation. I hope you enjoy the conversation we've got going on here today, and thank you again for tuning in. All right, thank you again for joining us for another episode of Blue Square Security. We are joined today by Joey Muniz, who is a Security Copilot SSP, and we'll let Joey explain exactly what that actually means, what that role entails. But just for everybody listening, Joe, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and then your current role here at Microsoft.
Sure. Thank you first for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're in the world. Name's Joey Muniz. And yes, my role here is all about Microsoft Security AI, so Security Copilot, specifically manufacturing. But again, US wide for that. Background. I come from 2 decades of doing security. I've published 10 books in cybersecurity, so 2 specifically on the Security Operations Center. So it kind of makes sense for me to be doing AI because AI requires the plumbing and, for SOC. Yeah, so a lot of my experience in meeting with SOCs around the world, understanding their practices, whether it's risk, vulnerability, et cetera, and be able to help them convert that into an AI conversation makes sense. Beyond that, I also run the security blogger and been basically consulting in the space at other big companies, your Cisco's, Northrop Grumman's, et cetera, for again over 2 decades. But that's, in a nutshell, me. If you may have seen me at a talk, I've also spoken at pretty much every major conference. So RSA, US, Europe, China, and some of the other big ones, ISC Squared conferences and Cisco Lives and stuff. So that's me.
Yeah, cool. All right.
Is that all?
Got
a DJ as well. You
No,
see the
okay.
back here as well.
I
Actually,
do.
if you're at the RSA party last year for Microsoft, I was the one DJing. They actually rented me turntables, and they had an opening or a main act, and they canceled, so I became the main act. So it was like 3 hours DJ set. So if you were at RSA last year, US, you would have heard old school hip hop. That was me as well.
Multi-talented, Greg. Look at this guy, man. AI and DJing, can't beat that.
Yep.
So we could probably get into a nutshell of talking about the books. I personally, I find that fascinating. One of my bucket lists is to be a published writer at some point. So I may have to come back and pick your brain on that.
Talk to me about it.
So obviously we're here to talk about AI, and I wanted to start the conversation to put ourselves in the shoes of a customer, or maybe somebody that's not even a Microsoft customer. There's a lot of banter, may not be the right word. There's a lot of chatter about OpenAI and ChatGPT, and then we transition over to the Microsoft side of things, and we talk about Security Copilot. Kind of give us a 30,000-foot view of what makes Security Copilot different from just dumping ChatGPT into Sentinel, or just leveraging a simple thing. Well, not simple, but just leveraging ChatGPT within Microsoft. How do you make that distinction?
Well, it's a big question with a lot of ways to approach it. I would say a couple ways to think about this. First, OpenAI or any open system, the biggest concern with security would be the sensitivity of data. So with this solution, the Microsoft security solution versus like an OpenAI, your data is your data. So we're not training the system on your data. So if you use an open system, there's a potential, all the sensitivity conversation around how you're using my data and all, to train the systems. Will somebody ask it and reveal some sensitive stuff? Like all those concerns is kind of with an open system. Even our competitors that can't afford to build a system, because if you really think about building a system, it costs billions of dollars. I mean, there's us, Google is only a few people that can really do that. Everybody else is going to have to leverage these open systems, which means everybody else's data is going to be part of how these systems are learning. This solution was built by Microsoft for our SOC internally. So it wasn't like we took one thing and put a wrapper on it. This was built for the Security Operations Center by Microsoft. You may not realize this, but if you think about it, Microsoft is one of the top most attacked companies in the world. There's only a few people that can claim that. So it was built around those lessons learned. So it's not like one thing wrapped on another. It was built for the SOC. You can't go to this and say, how do I bake an apple pie or create, a activities for my kids this weekend? This doesn't include that. This is a SOC built one. So the big difference is one would be is that this is built with your data being your data, et cetera. So you're not part of this bigger learning system. It's built for a SOC. So it's not like a general chat GPT type thing converted into a SOC. This is designed for the SOC. And then, lastly, if it comes to why this, it's designed to basically be a co-pilot, not an autopilot, meaning that we're trying to understand how SOCs function and try to figure out what tools are needed, whether it's first party or third party, because you mentioned that component as well. We find, for example, 72% of SOCs use ServiceNow as their ticketing system. So that's integrated, obviously. So we're constantly thinking about how the SOC thinks for proactive or reactive threat hunting, incident response, vulnerability, et cetera. And all those use cases are being built into this. So it's not just like an open API, chat GPT to kind of do things. We're specifically looking at playbooks, specifically looking at how this can basically provide value and building the system around that. So those would be kind of the big three differentiators that we see when people compare and say, oh, it's just open AI on steroids. It's like, no, it's not that. And here's the reasons why.
With some of the conversations that you're having with customers that have expressed interest in it, is that a common question of, is I guess everybody's worried about their data and their security. I mean, that's what we
Yeah.
do and live and breathe. But are you having questions about explain this why it's different to me than just open AI? Is that a conversation that's being brought up?
Yeah, I would say the top three in this field of conversations that we're having is first one is hallucinations. And for those that are not in the AI space, the idea is you ask it a question and it gives you a wrong answer, but it believes it's correct. So you say, who's who did this one thing 100 years ago, and it can't find the data because it doesn't have the data sets. So it just makes up a name. It says Clippy did it. And next thing you know, it believes it's Clippy, and it's confident in its answer, but it's wrong. It's a hallucination. So to answer that, the best way to deal with that is to validate where it came from. And a lot of the AI systems, at least I'm seeing right now, are closed box systems. So you ask it something, and then you get a response and says, "Watch out, this is generated by AI." What we're doing on our side to rebuttal that is we're very open and transparent about where the answers come from. So first we have our threat intelligence, which again, we're one of the biggest. And then we have these various tools, or call them skill sets. So it's going to tell you the reason I got this answer is because I went to this tool or this threat intelligence, this skill set, and pulled this, and you can click and validate that. So you can have a lot more confidence of this is not a hallucination and we're going to take action on this. It's not a false positive because you can actually click and validate on where it got it from. But I will say what the industry needs to learn is about good questions and great questions. If you ask it a very generic question and then you ask it again, you'll get two answers because it may first go here and then it'll go here for the answer. A great question will be very specific, like, tell me about the vulnerabilities on my users over here's assets using Intune. And if as you're more specific, then it's going to be much more narrow and you'll get less likely of hallucination because you're being very specific. So that's kind of the big one. Second one I would say is around the idea of just data security in general. And one cool thing about last week is at Ignite, we announced that now we integrate with the whole Purview data security stuff. And we're seeing a lot of conversation like, hey, I'm using Microsoft or anything else, but particularly Microsoft 365 or some other Copilot. And my concern is data is potentially could be leaked. This security Copilot data component can validate that security levels are being maintained. So if you take a document and it has classified and top secret, it'll pick the most secure one and ensure that goes on with the life cycle of that document, as well as validate data throughout the organization. So not only is it about the data privacy, like I mentioned before, your data is your data and all that, but it's also now with adding the data security components, you could ask it general language questions about your data, like this event, how does it impact my data, or what users are accessing this, all that data stuff, and you can simplify it with this as well. So that's the second big thing is that. And then lastly, I guess I mentioned is the protection of the data. And the simple answer is we protect this like any other Azure thing. Like unless you think you can hack, our Azure backend, you get the same level of protection in how we're protecting the data here. Same thing with tenants. Very, very common. People ask, well, I have an MSSP. Can they access my data? It's your tenant. So if you want them to do that, great. But we're not sharing anything. You treat it just like we protect an Azure tenant. But those are probably the big three in this whole data conversation and hallucination conversation and accuracy that at least I'm brought into every day.
That is a interesting component to AI as a whole.
Mhm.
Do we have? I don't know if you have the answer to this or not, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Fire away.
Do we have stats that talk about the hallucination rate of our AI versus like with a lot of our offerings? We have compete sheets that say we're really good here, and here's some of our areas that we need to improve on. But with this being kind of like a false positive and it's called a hallucination, do we have stats that talk about that specific part of the AI?
See, stats could be misleading. So no, like for example, you'll hear we see a bazillion trillion bits of data per second and just numbing numbers and the competitor will say we do bazillion and one, we do
Right.
bazillion and two, we block more than everybody else. Like those things don't really have an impact. So like to give somebody a number, it's kind of apples and oranges because we're not talking about effectiveness. As I mentioned, we're talking about two things. One, are you asking the right questions? Because again, if you ask an open-ended question to any AI, the way it works is it hears your prompt, and then from there, it's going to figure out where to get the information from. And the magic isn't like just generally that handoff, because any open AI can do that. To say, ask a question and go find the answer. The magic is the decision to choose where that information is at to get an answer. For example, if you ask, the examples I've seen in training classes about like, tell me about the bank. A bank could be a place for money, or a bank could be like the ocean, like the bank over there, or it can be like, yo, that's so bank. And I'm using some slang you've never heard before. It's got to be able to figure out those questions, or what time's the bank open. It's got to first figure out what bank you're talking about, and then it's got to figure out where it's located, and then what the time is. So it's got to be able to understand. I need to go online to this source to find time. I need to go online to find where the bank is located via Google Maps or wherever you're going to go for that. I got to go find out. And it's like you have to understand where to find the answers. That's the magic in AI technology. So, from an accuracy perspective, it's two things. It's the plumbing. Does the AI have the ability to connect to the right data? For example, privacy again. If somebody doesn't have authorized access, I'm not an admin, and I ask it a question, the AI is going to use my credentials and it won't be able to access that data, so you won't get an accurate answer. Or if I'm an admin and it has those credentials, it can get that answer. So the plumbing has got to be there so it can find the right data. And then two, you got to ask the right questions. Like that's how you're going to get the best value versus having a lot of hallucinations. So our constant rebuttal when it comes to us versus others is we're going to be transparent. So in the end, if you're wondering if it's a hallucination or accurate, then challenge yourself. Click how did the AI get there? And if it's wrong, when you click how the AI got there, you're probably going to see it either didn't have access to the right resource or it accessed the wrong resource, or you just basically were too broad in your question and just follow up with a more accurate question like, oh, I see that. How about that question with using Sentinel? Or how about you tell me about this specific thing? And it will basically take what it did before and then add more and get more specific. So it's not about accuracies. It's not like defense tools. I mean, how many blocks happened yesterday? There's more of the human element of asking the right questions, and there's more of the plumbing to exist or not. That's where the accuracy basically is there, or if the fail happens. It's not about his AI or her AI is better than my AI. It's
Yeah.
apples and oranges.
That's maybe I just haven't dug deep enough into our solutions because it is so new, but
Mhm.
it brings up an interesting point of kind of segmenting the ability for an admin to do XYZ versus a new hire being able to do ABC. So
Right.
we're going to have the ability to hone in somebody that's got, a longer tenure and has greater rights versus somebody that's up and coming, just got hired and is lower on the hierarchy. So the AI is going to see the rules and the specific rule sets that we've put on the user where they sit in the org to where they're able to go as far as leveraging this tool. Is that kind of
No, no, no. So I would say a couple things. For one, we're actually hoping this technology skills up. Meaning if I'm new to the company, I'm tier one, or another example would be I'm an incident responder, but I don't understand vulnerabilities. The whole point of the tool is to skill that person up. So I can say, well, what's a CVE? Or who is this threat actor? Explain this to me. Or I can't code, like my skill set is this, I don't understand how to code in that. The whole idea is you can ask it and it can explain it and skill up. So I don't want this to seem like you have to be more advanced or have more privileges where the person that's 2 weeks in can't get value. The opposite. We're hoping that the new people actually can skill up, especially the idea of summarizing things like write me a report or explain this to a non-technical person in a PowerPoint and have it do a lot of those steps. But from a access perspective, what you're asking, we're trying to leverage the existing multi-factor and basically role-based access control. So we're not adding additional layer of that. It's if you are an admin or you are a user or you have access or don't have access based on existing role-based access, this is going to leverage that versus creating another layer. That's
Yep.
what's happening. That makes
Yeah.
sense? Like we're not trying to change that because role-based access control and multi-factor authentication, all that's been there for a while now. Like we're
Right.
just writing that, if it makes sense.
I mean, the more you talk about this, the more it seems like users are going to have some sort of 101 training class on how to ask the right questions and how to propose questions based on, what they're trying to accomplish. It's almost
Well, bingo. I agree. So people ask constantly, especially with the early access program, I can't take on another project. I don't have the time to install this and all that. And basically the reality and the rebuttal of that is, well, first off, this is not something you're installing, like you're turning on, enabling the licenses and you get access. But to your exact point, the time is going to be learning how to use AI, which is how to ask the right questions. And honestly, like when I've talked to customers that said, well, we don't have the time, it's like your staff is going to want on their resume that they have skill sets like this, like, and they're going to be essentially they're fast tracking your AI strategy right now. And all these people, I don't think are going to complain about more work. It's like you're showing them the future, and only a handful of people can get access. Like they're going to want to learn this. It's the same thing 10, 15, 20 years ago. If you were a telephony analog phone person, and you're like, check out this voice over IP stuff, and they're like, I'll get to that. Fast forward to today, who's installing analog phones? Like everybody's
right.
voice over IP. Same scenario right now. Like it's going to be the learning curve of that. How do I use this, whether it's Microsoft or anybody else's technology?
Mike, are you going to chime in there?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I think we do have the prompt books, ways to help them out. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of what those
Sure.
will do for everybody. Yeah, I'll let you just go.
Yeah. So you mentioned the term prompt book. So if what we're talking about is, it's very common when you address a situation. So again, looking at like a SOC, and I'm going to like address a vulnerability. It's very likely you need certain points of information. So you're going to ask the same questions. So what we're doing is we're trying to simplify it more by basically creating prompt books. So instead of expecting you to understand how to write the right questions, just choose a prompt book and say, boom, and it's going to automatically ask those same common questions. And the future is eventually, just like with playbooks in the world of SOAR, where you say, hey, rather than manually doing this, 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 and this, let's create a playbook. And then you basically diagram what those steps are. And then you start to figure out, can I automate this? Can I automate that? That's a playbook going into SOAR, or security orchestration automation response. We're doing the same thing with prompt books and saying, here's the most common asks. Let's make it simple. So somebody from day one can go to the prompt books and say, yes, this is the questions I would need to ask. And then eventually start building their own prompt books, just like you build your own playbooks. Did I answer that correctly? Anything else you want to add, Michael,
No,
about that?
no, that was what I was trying to get at, right? There's a
Yeah,
way to circumvent a little bit of that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
there's still going to be an element of training that needs to be had. So I guess, you're kind of on the the front lines of, right, this early access program. From what you're seeing with the customers that are using it, what have they been saying? Hey, here's some of the biggest benefits we're getting kind of right out of the gate from the product.
Yeah, I mean, first off, there's been a few blog posts that I reference them to that talks about. So for those that don't know, before the early access, it was private preview. So private preview, we selected some customers, and even at the Ignite last week keynote, they were referencing the feedback from some of those customers. So right away to understand ROI, it's like, well, you can listen to them. Um, the other ROI thing though that I'm trying to explain is it's just in general the idea, like I mentioned, of getting access to this. Um, Being basically investing in your SOC strategy now versus waiting 6 months, a year, creating technical debt, et cetera. When I talk about specific ROI, initially we focused on 3 use cases. It was a quickening incident response, because typically just in general, you got to click a lot of dashboards, or just any kind of response like, are we vulnerable to something curbs on security posted on a blog? Now I need to first go to the blog. I need to understand what this is. Then I need to go to a couple tool sets, see if we own those assets, and then see if we're vulnerable, or if it's an incident response, like he's talking about the threat of the month. What are they using? What are they attacking? Are we vulnerable to that? Do we have the defenses in place? This is a lot of research and clicking. So the idea to ask these questions in human language and get response has been game changing. The second would be reporting. So the idea of summarize this in a PDF for a non-technical person, even add a joke at the end around IT, and it can like do all that and throw the main joke in there as well, or summarize this so I can drop it in ServiceNow and hand us off with a summary of what I did. That is like major time saving. And then lastly would just be making sure that you're hitting everything, meaning that like if you're just clicking a dashboard, are you taking consideration all the other tools and what threat intelligence is out there? And with the AI, it can hit a lot of data and kind of validate and say yes or no based on all these sources. However, that's the value as of last week. We're already seeing value today was because we unlocked the 3 new things. We unlocked the purview, the data security, and we immediately have seen some customers say, yes, it's a pain in the butt for me to identify the tagging and what data is sensitive. With the generative AI, I can actually dramatically reduce what I've been doing the last 3 months validating data security. So I'm already hearing that. And then the other one would be the cloud security, the CASB stuff, where people are saying, is our data and shadow IT validating that? And I was on a call this morning. One customer spent a lot of time dealing with user password resets. So a user will call in and say, my account's locked, and they have like 7 accounts. And they can now go with the Copilot and say, which of the 7 accounts are locked? Why is it locked? Is this person a high risk user? And like, boom, they got the answer to all 3 of those. It's this
Oh, cool.
account, and they had 5 missed passwords at this time. This is the reason why. So those are like, as of literally a couple of days ago on the new stuff, we're already seeing the ROI on that. And I suspect as we do more, we're just going to keep seeing these new ROI cases appear as customers use this technology.
I keep referencing ChatGPT because that's kind of I was one of the early adopters to that and
Okay.
fascinated by it, and I've used it for quite a while. The output, and you mentioned reporting, and it's one of those components that I hadn't really thought of, but
Uh-huh.
it's so in your face. So if you're going to go in and say, I've identified XYZ and I need to get some reporting and a PDF, and you even mentioned like adding a joke at the end.
Yep.
What does the output of that actually look like? Is that emailed to the user, or is that brought up in a live document? Like what does the actual output of that look like?
Depends on how you ask it. So you can say, so a couple things. First off, there's the Copilot blended experience. So if you're in Defender, for example, it pops up in Defender and it will summarize things on the right. So as you're doing things, it's kind of summarizing over here, and you can always copy and paste that. And then there's, if you have not seen this, which a lot of people haven't, then Copilot has like its own interface, and you can ask a question, summarize this as well. If you ask it for a PowerPoint or something, it's going to format it for that, but it'll be an empty template. requests have come in. Can I use my template? Not there just yet, but I imagine at some point you'll probably be able to pump in your own like template for whatever, what it's a document or a PDF or something, and it'll fill that. Today it's just more generic, and you just copy and drop it into your template. But it just depends on what format you ask it and what you're asking it. So it may just say summarize these vulnerabilities. It's only going to be bullet points. But if you say like summarize this for an executive audience, and you can even give it more intent to update the status of the risk within our organization, it's going to write a summary with the intent of explaining risk. So this is, high risk, low risk, et cetera. It will consider what you're asking and summarize it in that language. And then if you say the audience, technical, non-technical, SOC leaders, analysts, malware analysts, depending on what you're asking, the language will adjust. So you can ask it to summarize it for 6 different audiences and get 6 different formats, because it's going to consider what you're asking, which goes back, good questions and great questions. If you want a great outcome, ask it specifically of what you're trying to do, and you'll get that summary in that format.
All of this is so fat. I mean, that's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
For geeks, I guess it's cool. You mentioned ServiceNow, and that's obviously a big player.
Mhm.
Are there other major integrations that come to mind when we talk about Security Copilot that you kind of need to mention because it's just so in your face?
So out of the box, EAP, or early access program, I have to keep stopping with some of the acronyms here. Out of the box, we had 3 focuses, which was first the XDR platform, which is Extended Defense Response. It's Sentinel. And that's because it's reading data from other tools. So if somebody says, what about my Cisco gear? What about my Zscaler? Or what about my Palo? If it's in Sentinel, it can still reason on that. So that unlocks right away a ton of other gear. The other one was Defender, the EDR, so endpoint defense and response, because again, a lot of risk is on endpoints. It would make sense for that. And then the third was Intune, which would make sense because we're talking asset management and vulnerability management. If I'm going to say, is my, you're the threat of the month, are we vulnerable? And what can we do? Like what steps, patching, whatever it is, you need something to reason on what you own and what the state is, and that would be Intune. That's out of the box plumbing for first party. And then we've added the Purview, the identity, and the Defender for Cloud. For third party, initially ServiceNow, because again, 72% of SOCs we saw say this is the first thing we do is open a ticket. Also, they said a lot of customers are Splunk customers or Splunk and Sentinel customers using Sentinel for Microsoft data and then sending it to Splunk. So there's a Splunk plugin today. Cisco acquired them. So if Cisco changes things, I don't know if it's going to change the support for it, but there's that. Customers have asked for other tools, but again, if we can reason on it through Sentinel, like Cisco or something, yeah, the plugin will be there, but you also can reason through the SIM. So today, that's what's out of the box. The talk of the talk is that there's going to be more and more plugins. Maybe there'll be an open community where partners and others can develop these. Maybe we'll eventually offer the ability to create your own plugins. So just like in a SIM store market, you can parse anything. And most SIMs do that. Like you can say, I don't support Joey's homegrown thing. Well, just send the data and reason on it, create a parser so the thing understands it, and then it works. I would predict that it'll be something like that, where you can create your own plugins to basically parse the data for the AI to understand. But this is, again, we're not even generally available yet. So this is just kind of what we're hearing and what may come. Today, it's ServiceNow and Splunk are the official third party. And then it's basically the Microsoft first party stuff today. But I imagine you're just going to, over the next few months, more and more things will be unlocked and allow, more data to be used.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Ignite too, and there was a plethora of announcements that came out during Ignite. I think Michael and I were talking earlier, over 100 different announcements that came out just last week.
Yeah.
Over the course of that week, was there one that, and you're kind of behind the scenes as far as your role is concerned, and maybe this is a loaded question, but was there one of those announcements that you were hoping would show up and it did show up, or were you kind of privy to the data that was going to be announced?
I mean, this is my job is this. So no, there was nothing I was surprised about. I mean, again, like they internally, we've been talking about these things Also, the EAP, the early access customers, are giving feedback and helping adjust priorities of things. So we're constantly like echoing the voice, like I'm echoing the voice of US manufacturing. So you can think of, how many big customers we have that have very powerful voices. So now we're there. There's nothing as a surprise. I would just say before Ignite, some of these plugins appeared, like the identity one, the intro stuff, that appeared a few weeks before Ignite. So I was surprised, like, oh, I knew this was coming. They're already doing this. That's typically how the surprises happen. Not like I'm not, preview or any of my peers that are focusing on this. We're pretty deeply involved.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to point out too, you talk about plumbing. One thing that people don't think about, unlike SIM and SOAR, a really important aspect of this is the threat intelligence. And one thing that we do is with early access, we charge $50,000 if you want to buy one seat of our threat intelligence, but you get unlimited access. And the reason why this makes sense is any artificial intelligence, people are going to be asking questions that require looking at the world. So, like, who is a threat actor, or is this thing a real risk? It's got to go back and understand who else is being attacked. What are the vulnerabilities if it's pivoting and all that? So it's like some of these other people that are talking like we do AI, and it's like, okay, vendor XYZ, what's the gasoline powering this? And if I'm talking about a tool or a set of tools, that's not AI. That's a SOAR. Like that's not AI. AI has got a reason on the outside world. So just one of the other plumbing things that people aren't really thinking about until we have this conversation. It's like you need an AI component behind or a TI or a threat intelligence component behind your AI, or you're not going to get any value. You're just basically doing SOAR. So again, I just had a note of that as we are kind of asking this conversation. Like people really need to be thinking about that. And I imagine one thing I didn't see, and which I plan to ask and more about, is where are we at with all the other threat intelligence out there? Because that's an area that I've not seen plugins for just yet that I would think that they may want to add more to, because again, threat intelligence is really fueling AI. But again, just
Yeah.
kind of a side point that I wanted to throw out there as well.
So you mentioned that your role is for manufacturing.
That's
Are
right.
you talking with other SSPs that cover other verticals? Like, are there other
There
of
are.
your
There are.
role? Okay.
Yeah, and the challenge with some of the other verticals is specifically with our early access program, they made it very specific to who's allowed. So for example, military and the GovCloud stuff isn't allowed for EAP. I mean, they're building for GA, and the reason why for them or for healthcare, there's things like HIPAA compliance, and for the military, various sorts of compliance that we're going to obviously meet, but we're not meeting for a product that's not generally available yet. So unfortunately, one of my peers that are in those spaces are kind of like handcuffed. They're like, no, I'm talking to my customers about it, but like they can't do early access and they can't test it in certain areas. They're like, we're only doing USA right now. So like Europe and some of the other groups that have data sovereignty and other concerns, they're bringing those up. And my peers over there are just like, yeah, we're just kind of talking to them and briefing them, but they don't have as much street traction right now as, like, for example, the team I work with, because we're green light for EAP. We're green light for everything. We don't have those compliance and data sovereignty and other concerns because I'm US manufacturing, so I'm a sweet spot for this tool.
That's kind of where my question was leading to, because
Yeah.
I was talking to a neighbor of mine who is a CISO of a small suburb here in Georgia,
Uh-huh.
and he was describing what their footprint looked like, and he mentioned and just kind of casually dropped in on-prem exchange. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. You mean a
Yeah.
city of that size still uses on? It's like, yeah, we still use this. I mean, they're still
Yeah.
leveraging legacy technology for their day to day.
Mhm.
And I started kind of relating that to what we're talking about here today.
Uh-huh.
Their timeline of preparing themselves for AI has got to be so much farther down the road than somebody that's in manufacturing that's using automated, systems for quick ticketing. Are you seeing that? Is
Sometimes,
there a disparity,
sometimes
or really?
there's some manufacturing systems where I've talked to, and they have these $1 million sawmills running like 1980 software, like
Oh,
software that
geez.
can run on my daughter's phone. And this thing is the thing is designed to like cut, for example, and it's a lot of metal. It's worth millions of dollars, but there's no reason to upgrade the software. But it is connected online, for example. So it's like those still exist today. I mean, I can give many examples of that over beers. So to your
That always
point,
amazes me.
yeah, it's like that. To your point though, what the conversation we're having now is nothing new in that regard. Meaning, we've been talking about modernizing security since security. I mean, you should have the latest people, process, and technology. The difference, though, is in the past, when like somebody says, Microsoft, help me reduce my vendor count, help me simplify the complexity of integrations, all these things, it's always came down to like cost savings and being more effective. Like if I understand that by having these 10 tools, I'm less effective by having the automation of XDR. That's been happening forever. Any consultant's been doing that. What's changes is the wrapper. Now it's not cost savings or being more modern. Now it's if you want to do this cool stuff with AI, you want to be able to say, all right, we had a business email compromise that impacted 200 users. Tell me about this. The AI has to reason over email security. It's got to reason over endpoint security because some kind of compromise was delivered through the email. It's got to do the reputation security, like when they click the link, what websites and stuff were happening, who are the threat actors. It's got to reason over potentially your lateral movements. So the logins, like if this thing's logging in a bunch of times, it's your identity solution. It's got to reason over all these things. And if the plumbing isn't mature, when you ask these questions, you're going to get garbage in, garbage out. So it's a different conversation for the same result, which is you need to mature your security. You need to reduce the vendor count, improve simplicity, and now the reason is to support AI. So same conversations, just like my SOC book when I'm consulting about what is best practice. I'm doing the same thing, but now the end result is you can support AI better, not cost savings and more efficiency.
Yeah. Vitaly, I think I interrupted you. You're going to chime in.
Please.
No, I wasn't, but I can go to the next question if you want.
There you go.
No, so I've asked this on the last podcast we had, so I want to be consistent, right? So we're obviously talking about all the great things that AI and Security Copilot's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
There is the dark side of things. What do you see as kind of the risks, right? It does enhance the SOCs, right? And it lowers the barrier to entry, all the things you said, but it does kind of the same thing for threat actors. I mean, what do you kind of see as the issues, the risks going forward from that perspective?
Yeah. So if you've seen me on any of my classes, I'm teaching a zero class in I think 2 weeks. Any of these classes, anything I do, I always have a slide that has a cat and mouse because it's a cat and mouse game. So every time the attackers, do something, the defenders create a defense, and then the attackers respond. Actually, my blog, I just posted, there's a threat that basically does anti-sandboxing. So a sandbox is designed to take malware, let it run, try to like simulate human activity. So then it triggers the malware, it runs, and you learn about the malware and defend against it. Now the attackers have bought the defender's tools and basically say, here's all the aspects we need to prove somebody's human. So the sandboxes are going to simulate movements, but humans don't really do that. And now they have anti-sandbox detections that basically can determine a human from an unknown system. So AI, to your question, is going to make those kind of things much more effective, where the anti-defender stuff are going to be basically AI learning about the tools, learning about the user before they actually launch the attacks. That's my prediction. Today, the low-hanging fruit is like the human elements. So like I said, generate a report. You can say generate a phishing attack.
Yep.
Or, take all the data, like, Joey works at Microsoft, comb his data and generate something around Thanksgiving to him. Like you can be very good at like the social engineering aspects. That's happening today. And you'll see more of that versus, 5-10 years ago, the Nigerian prince broken English email saying you own something. But I don't think that's the real danger. I think the real danger is what I initially was talking about, which is how do I take defense and anti-detection mechanisms and leverage AI to basically learn about the host. So instead of just launching when it affects something, learn about the host and learn and then compare that to 10,000 other hosts. And if this person looks different, it's probably a sandbox or it's probably a detection tool, and being very tactical bypassing. So essentially, robots are learning your SOC and your defense in depth, and then not making movements until it feels confidence and a confident score before making movements. That's where I have the most fear in your question, and it's eventually what Bill Schneider has talked about, which is basically eventually it's going to be robots versus robots. So my robots are smarter than your robots because humans aren't going to be able to like keep up with the kind of data and the kind of change. It's just going to be my machines learning about your machines. Like that's where a lot of Bruce, not Bob, Bruce Snyder. That's where a lot of the analysts kind of talk about. That's where the fear is at, is the machine learning and AI driven malware versus like what we're seeing today, which is like the social engineering and some of the fast tracks that it does, or convert this code, this malware to a different format. Again, that's what we're seeing today, but that's not the real threat of your question.
Sure. Well,
there's always the flip side of that coin, and it's a hard question to ask. It's a hard answer to hear, but it's inevitable. And in some levels, we're already there. I mean, we're talking about 65 trillion signals a day here at Microsoft. I mean, these are numbers that humans simply can't, we can't wrap our head around it. So on some level, we're there. But it is interesting to think, if you put yourself in their shoes for a minute, what do they have access to? And I think there's a big misconception that when people hear threat actors or hackers, that it's that lonely kid in his basement with a hoodie on, and it's not. These are well-funded. These are well-funded organizations that have.
They put on the mask and then they sit there in the computer and do it. No, I mean,
same one right behind me.
The reality is this. I mean, couple things. First, the threat actors can buy the same technology that we or anybody else sell. Like they get access to it. In previous roles, and a buddy of mine I've written a few books with, Amir Lakhani, who's a senior researcher at Fortinet, he's been involved with takedowns. And I remember once we were at DEF CON speaking, and he had to fly out. So I had to do the talk solo because they were doing a major takedown in the Philippines. And like he said, when they took them down, they had every vendor's tools in a rack of gear. So they literally are testing to see how that happens. So like that's always going to be the case, regardless of today or the future. What happens is, long as we're thinking best practice, which is basically defense in depth, so trying to have layers of security, as long as we're thinking about having a constant improving strategy. So you talk about maturity, the higher level maturity SOCs are constantly improving. So as we execute, we're not reactive or proactive and constantly learning. As long as we're like constantly doing that, it's not the attackers are going to go after that org. They're likely going to go after the ones that are easy targets. And it's always been that way, which is the ones that are not maturing, like you mentioned. I'm surprised this guy still has on-prem stuff. Like it's those customers that are short staff or people have left and they just are afraid to touch and break things. And they just kind of leave it as status quo. As you don't do things, you're creating technical debt. And if you haven't done anything in 10 years, you have 10 years of technical debt beyond everybody else who's been keeping up with things, and you're a high-risk target. Those are the ones that need to be fearful. But the ones that are kind of doing their security as a journey and constantly investing in stuff, Defender technology will adapt. It'll be a cat and mouse game, and it'll be the same risk level in my mind it is today as anybody else, as long as you're doing your due diligence. The risk is there. It's always going to be there, but it's not going to be as high as the ones that are not doing due diligence. So I don't care where we're at in technology. There's always going to be a cat and mouse game. Do due diligence, invest in security. Don't just like set and forget things, and don't assume that it's good enough right now. You're going to be a target. You're going to be a prime target now or in the future for whatever the threat may be.
Not if, but when.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've got two questions remaining because we are coming up on time. And thank you again for your time. So we've talked a little bit about the EAP, or the early access program. If somebody's listening and they're not already signed up, is there time left? And if there is, what are the first steps to take to get that ball rolling?
Sure. So first off, I'm doing a webinar next week. So I don't know when you're releasing this, but I can give you access to info for that. We'll be talking in detail about the EAP. But in short, the EAP door closes December 18th, I believe. And that's for nominations. So it's nominations for that. And then I believe you must commit financially by the mid-January timeframe. And you get 6 months regardless. So if you committed January 1st, and this product becomes generally available in March or April, you still have 6 months. The program is $50,000 for unlimited seats of both the Copilot as well as our threat intelligence. So again, threat intelligence, you charge 50,000 for one analyst seat. You get unlimited for both. From a requirements perspective, talk to us. We like to see things like Defender deployed and a few other things, but like there's no like really hard commitments. And even then, like we've had customers say we're CrowdStrike customers. It's like that's fine. You can deploy us in a passive mode to get some of the data from that. And we even have what's called Fast Track that will come out at no cost and help you deploy that. So like in the end, I'm not really saying no to anybody that like wants to do this. It's more about like, does it make sense for them? Does it make sense for Microsoft? And from there, we can work out the T's and C's. But yeah, see our team for more or see the webinar next week, and we'll kind of go over some more of those like T and C's. But date wise, December 18th, Microsoft would internally nominate, and we were only allowing like 800. So if we hit that limit before then, the door closes or they close the door that date. And then the commitment would be by the mid-January. And then you get your 6 months of unlimited access for both things.
Perfect. And I'll put the webinar link in the description. So Vitaly, I'll turn it over to you to ask the last question.
Yeah, that's the question we asked everybody. It was
Sure.
our 10th time. So you just became the CISO at your dream company. You pick whatever company that is. What is your first move, deployment, engagement, whatever it is? What's the first thing you do? And you're probably the perfect person to ask this question to. So
okay, so this is not a like AI question. You're just in general.
No,
you've been
just in general. No.
Yeah, I've actually been in this seat both from consulting a new CISO to even a company who doesn't have a CISO and one's coming on. Honestly, the first thing I would do is try to get a state of the land. So you're not going to make change if you don't understand the pros, cons, and what's happening within your org. So typically what I recommend, this is actually my book as well, is about heat mapping and understanding kind of current state. So heat mapping is going to be understanding what tech you have, what licenses you have, and what's covered and what's not covered against kind of like a generic best practice. And I have like images and slides that I use and I give out to customers they can have no vendors involved. It's just kind of like, what are you doing for like data security? Are you doing e-discovery and lifecycle management, those kind of things? In your SOC, do you have SIM/SOAR XDR? Do you have a data governance program for end users? Do you have multi-factor EDR? Like non-vendor, just kind of heat map to understand what we have. So first thing is understanding that, and then also understanding the people side and the process. So what is internal, what is outsourced, what is hybrid? Do we have any managed service agreements, et cetera? As well as on top of all of that, do we have an IR program? So if something goes wrong, who do we call right now? How does the IR program work? Like I will try to get all of that kind of in place and heat map it against kind of a general best practice. So immediately if I see any major gaps, especially if like I have compliancy requirements and then we're not meeting that. And I actually literally had this happen a couple of times where I analyzed somebody's IR agreement and said, you can't use this agreement because you don't have these components and it requires you to have these components and you let that contract die. So if you get owned and you call these people or your cyber insurance is not going to be able to come in, or the IR team is going to charge you more to deploy this tool because you don't have these components. So it's like, again, you got to understand that state of the land, and then you can find initial 90-day low-hanging fruits like, we need to do this because our cyber insurance, or we need to do that because of a gap. That's typically where I start. And then from there, you start thinking proactive strategy. But I go very reactive. Let's understand the states. Let's understand the investments. Let's understand the playbooks. And then from there, I can identify kind of the low, medium, and high tasks for my first 90 days.
That was your first day. What are you going to do on your second day? After you've done all that.
Yeah. That's my first 30 days is that. And then from there, it's taking this information, going to the board and saying, let me give you an update. Here's who I am and here's what I believe it is. Challenge me if you don't think these next 60-day activities make sense or not, and back it up with what I found. Like that's my 90-day plan. 30 days to gather the information and then 60 days to build a plan and then go to the board and have all the assignments for that. But I'm not buying anything. I'm not making changes. I'm trying to understand things for my first 90 days.
Great answer.
We've asked this question now 8, 9, maybe even 10 times. And the more I hear the answers, the more sympathy I have for the people that have that title, because it truly is
Yeah.
It's a burden in some regards because there's so much to do, and especially if you're new and trying to gain the respect of your peers and make a stand as to you chose the right guy or gal. It's a big mountain to climb.
Yeah, I'd say the ones that have the least amount of success have come in and lean on their brand and lean on change right away. The ones that are more successful lean on listening and lean on trying to understand. So when they do decide to start making change, it's a we conversation on a me conversation, and they have evidence to back up why they're making that change. Like that's just from me consulting and talking to a lot of different leaders. The ones that are successful versus the ones that have a lot of rub. It's those different change of mentalities.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we as humans, we don't love change as much as something else.
Right, but if you justify it, so I say we're going to do this change because we're out of compliance, that's a much more powerful ask than I hate this technology. I like this technology. Let's go ahead and kill this and do this. It's like, well, what's your justification? Like that's again my personal experience. I've seen some come in and make major change, especially in military, where every 2 years they're flipping them, and it's like a leader comes in. It's like I want to make my brand and get the heck out. Like they tend to either be successful or just create a lot of disruption because again they're making change before having the reasoning.
No, the we versus me. I mean, I think that sums it up, and that's security is a team sport. We say that a lot, and it couldn't be more true.
Yep, great
So
question. I like it.
if somebody were interested in going out and getting one of your books, where's the best place to find you as an author?
If you go to like Amazon and type in my name, you'll see all my books or Barnes and Nobles or wherever you get your books. It's kind of fun to go into a Barnes and Nobles and go with my kid and be like, "Hey, you should buy this book," and see it there. But no, I mean, just look up my name. You'll find it there. The one I'm most proud of will be like this is the one I published last year. Is the Security Operations Center one, the SOC one, especially with the AI stuff I'm doing now. I also just did a Cisco Press Identity one, but you don't want that one. You want this one. But yeah, that would be the latest.
You're promoting your own book.
That better have a lot of pictures for me. That looks real thick.
Yeah. Well, I came from Cisco, so just kind of making a little jab at my ex-employer. But no, I have nothing bad to say about Cisco, and their certification programs are great. Obviously, I wrote questions and stuff for it, so I'll be pooping on myself if I was to make fun of it.
Well, this has been a good conversation.
Awesome.
It's one of those conversations that I think could have easily been 2 hours. But if you're listening and you're interested in the EAP or you're interested in just learning about Copilot in general, and there's more than just Security Copilot, please reach out to your account team here at Microsoft. And as far as the webinar that was mentioned, I'll make sure the information for that is included. I'll put some links for Joey's books in there, and then obviously nice. Our conversation around just getting in touch with your broader account team. A lot of stuff here that probably generate a lot of questions, so please don't be bashful. Reach out. Joey, thank you for your time, and look forward to hearing more as this offering matures and goes GA.
Yeah, to be clear, when you're asking about learning about copilots, there are different copilots at Microsoft. So you have to specifically say Security Copilot, because like there's GitHub Copilot for coding, there's M365 Copilot, and that's probably one of the big confusions is people say, tell me about Copilot, and they start hearing about the wrong one. So everything we talked about today is Security Copilot specifically for Microsoft. And I know that can be confusing, but it's Security Copilot if you want to hear about today's conversation.
Yeah, we've got a bunch. There's Office, there's Microsoft, there's
exactly
plenty of them. So again, Joey, thank you again. Hopefully when this becomes GA, we can have you back and talk about how this journey has evolved and what's gotten bigger and better since now.
Ask me back anytime. Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.